Morning, everybody. I My dad's from Ireland, and he immigrated over here when he was 14, and so most of my family is everyone on his side is still in Ireland, most of them, and so I get to go there every once in a while to visit family. And the way they do the weather in Ireland is they say tomorrow we're expecting general rain. And sometimes I'll have the 5-day forecast, and it will say, for the next 5 days, there will be general rain. So I wish we could have the same vibe. We'd have a whole lot more people here. If it just said, for the next few months, we're expecting general wintry weather instead of apocalyptic snow or whatever it is they're saying right now. Um, and actually, that's what I want to talk about this morning, our stories. So if you've already sensed already in what's been coming up this morning, we want to talk about compassionate action. That's our value for the month. And it has three braids, the way that we've, one braid, three strands, the way we've thought about it, and that's social justice, peace, and the third one is social justice, peace, and let me see if I wrote it down. I know I did in one of my previous talks. Human rights. So I want to pick up on the thread of peace this morning, and the title of my talk is "Words Create Worlds." That's actually a quotation from Abraham Heschel. Words create worlds. Don't forget, he says, the Holocaust started with words. And he's a contemporary, modern day prophet of sorts, Abraham Heschel. And so words create worlds. And what worlds have already been created this morning? The eagle and the wren and the drifter, with chaos on one hand and peace on the other, and expect to see that next week on my own knuckles. That's the kind of that's actually the line I want to hold, really, honestly. And Patty's story of just the ordinary happenings at the grocery store. Words create worlds, and those worlds are real, but the words also create worlds. And one reason why so few people are here this morning is because of Wood TV. Really, honestly, it's because words create worlds. And so I made a list this morning. I'm just going to read you words. And they're largely of the political variety. And after a while, you might even have a hard time guessing what the source. Some of them you'll know the source. But you might wonder who's telling this story? You might wonder to yourself. So, here we go. Stonewall Congress. Obliterate private plans. Women's reproductive health is under full-on attack. Fight for your rights. I will fight for all Americans. Ohio has been decimated. We dream big, but fight hard. I fight for regular people. I will take the fight to him. This is the Situation Room. News alert. Breaking news alert. Terror threat is at yellow. The war on the middle class. The war on the rich. The war on poverty. The war on pharmaceutical companies. The war on drugs. War on terrorism. War on guns. War on democracy. War on immigrants. war on American jobs, war on Christmas, war on Easter, war on Christ, war on facts. We had an attack on dairy prices. War on trade. We're building the most powerful weapons by man or womankind. I say mankind and womankind. They can fight. They're the real deal, these guys. So good looking. Fighting for workers. Fighting for Michigan workers. I'm killing it in the polls. Democrats are directly attacking 2.3 million Michigan voters. You've declared open war on American democracy. This threatens to destroy the founders' pledge. War on the flag. Fight for the Union. Russia is invading our election. Your Second Amendment is under very serious attack. They will take your guns. That's the end of my poem. I did no editing. I just wrote things that I heard this week and read. So, what does this poem, what is the energy of this poem? What is this language of this poem? What world does this poem create? War, fear, fighting, isolation, destruction, decimation. In other words, low-level consciousness, which is rooted in fight or flight or freeze. And this happens every single day, pumping through your radio and pumping through your television screen non-stop. You wonder why we live in this world. How did the world get created that we're inhabiting? Well, that's a complex question, but some of it is rooted in words create worlds. And if you believe you're under full-scale attack, what are you going to do? You're going to fight for your right to party. That's the Beastie Boys. That's more my terrain. So, I know we live in a polarized time, but there's something about the rhetoric that ratchets up the anxiety, the fear, the mistrust, the danger, the alert, the thing that we all carry, which is low-level lizard consciousness of fight or flight. We don't get to grow out of that, by the way. I don't care how enlightened you are. You're not like, I'm beyond fight or flight. Go stand in a river with a bear, okay? Which I have done. And you're not like, hey, I just love all beings, okay? So I might love all beings and they might kill me, some of them. So you don't get to grow out of that, but that is low level, is what I'd like to suggest this morning. And this is in the so-called greatest country on earth. And did you notice after a while, you couldn't tell even what side was saying any of those things? Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like, anybody could be saying that, except a few of them which were more obvious. What is it about this world that we are creating? And I might even say co-creating. Because guess what? We retweet these things, or repost these things, or share these things. So you create the world. I create the world. I can't just sit back and blame the man. That's fun for about 5 minutes until I realize I'm a co-creator in the world of language, which also creates the world that we inhabit. This thing that we call culture and life and human culture, we might say. And we're in a weird place because we have a tweeter in chief. That's what I like to call him. And that's just funny in and of itself. I mean, even if you're into Twitter or not into Twitter, it doesn't matter. They're still tiny phrases. There's no depth, and there's no complexity in Twitter. It's 106. Now there are more characters. I don't know what it is. It used to be 168 or something. Now it's like they upped it to whatever. Still, okay, we're not talking about a master's thesis here. And we have 30-second political ads, and the only ones that work are rooted in fear. Because you can't say anything in 30 seconds. I can barely say anything in like 30 minutes, and I always go over. And I haven't even started, obviously. So it's a strange culture, sound bites and memes and 30-second things and retweets and algorithms. And I keep mentioning this because we're about to ramp up it's 2020 now. So get ready. Here it comes. And I keep saying this. Remember, Facebook works on algorithms. When you click on one article from NPR, guess what they will feed you? 7 more articles from NPR. You click on one conspiracy theory, guess what they will feed you? 7 more. And I don't mean they. It's computerized math. It's not, what's his face? Zuckerberg. He's not like, watch this, It's just the way the system works. Don't think you're such a free thinker during 2020. All right? You get pumped full of stuff. That's what an algorithm is. And we're not that sophisticated, especially when the things coming our way have a measure of fight, flight, or freeze in them. We get activated or triggered, or hooked, or down the rabbit hole we go with Alice, Am I making sense? Words create worlds. And what are we going to do about it? What kind of world do you want to see? Is part of the question I'm trying to ask this morning. I remember when I was a school teacher, at first I was like, I have to be honest, I wanted to be a kind of cool school teacher. Like, hey guys, throwing out little, like, I'm aware of pop culture, which never works because students are like, oh God, he's already 7 years behind at best. But, I guess young teachers, they can't help it in a way. They want to be liked, or they want the opposite. They're going to say, I'm going to make sure my students hate me. So maybe neither approach really is all that healthy. But what I realized pretty quickly is that if I didn't ask very much, that's exactly what I got. But if I asked a lot and said, this is going to be challenging and you're not going to like everything, actually most students rose to the occasion. That's interesting human reality. And part of the 30-second soundbite retweet culture we live in is we don't ask very much of anybody. We don't ask them to think very much. We don't ask ourselves to think very much. And one of the things I'd like to suggest is, what are you asking of yourself and your friends and your neighbors when it comes to being a full participant in this thing that we call American life, democracy, a human being on this planet? And do we want to ask very little of people, even in our own circles, because that's what feels good? Or do we want to ask more difficult things, which requires us to get down in the weeds between chaos and peace on our knuckles, between in the middle of all that stuff, which is a little more challenging. So maybe my first point is, what level of expectation do you have when it comes to the world that you're co-creating with language and conversation and dinner table talk and articles that you might be sharing with people? What level of are you calling yourself to and others in your circles? Or would you rather stay down in the trenches, battling it out, mowing down the enemy, That's what you heard it. I just quoted back to you what we've been hearing for the past week. Multiply that by who knows how long. And by the way, I'm not saying, well, I should hold off on that point. I'll make the point in case I forget. I'm not saying what we really need is just to clean up our language and make everything sound nice. That's not what I'm saying. There's a time and a place to say fight, war, battle. There's a time and a place for that kind of rhetoric. Maybe all things belong. The question is, as the dominant cultural atmosphere, is it working? Are we gaining a more peaceful and just world? No, not really. So it doesn't appear to be working all that well. So I'm not saying, hey, just sound really nice. Please, don't be nice, all right? That's not exactly what I'm saying. And I'm not saying just be politically correct. That doesn't appear to work either, all right? So that was just a side point. All right. Let me get to my first point. Let me find where it is. Actually, maybe I made my first point. Let me just ask some questions. I've kind of already been asking them. What kind of language do you use? I mean, if you were to do like a searching moral inventory of the kind of language you use, what kind of language do you use? And do you want to be using that language? And what kind of world does it create? These are hard things. And I speak for a living, so this is like, I have a more public, you can critique me publicly. You're like, you said this, and it happens occasionally, But I'm not just talking about people who speak in public. I'm talking about what kind of language do you use in the circles that you're in? What kind of language? And what would it look like if over the next year you started to ask, what kind of world do I want to create with the kind of language that I'm responsible for pumping into the world? What kind of world does my own language create? That's a very interesting question. And if you take it all the way down to the family unit, you actually have a lot of power in the kind of language you say and use, correct? Power might not be the best word, but I can't think of another one. Influence. You have a lot of influence in how you speak. So this kind of question matters, at least in my mind. Here's another question. Do we want to call ourselves and others to higher states of consciousness? Because if we take, I mentioned this last year, the year before, I don't remember, being a bit simplistic, but if you think about some basic levels of consciousness or stages of consciousness, you have egocentric, very... the ego is the center. You have ethnocentric, which is the community is the major identity marker. What group or tribe am I in? Something like that. Then you have something like world-centric, which not that many people live in very often, which there's a recognition of my tribe is one of many, and there's something like the planet, and then maybe there's even something beyond that we might call the cosmos. So those are just four. And there are many ways to talk about levels of consciousness: egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric. And when it comes to language, you know what works? Ethnocentric. Ethnocentric consciousness loves things like, there's a war and I'm in the fight. For my ethnicity, that's what's actually being activated in the psyche, in who you are. Like my tribe, protect. They're going to take away my fill in the blank. And I'm saying nobody gets out of this. By the way, when it comes to stages of consciousness, you don't graduate permanently. You're like, I remember the days when I was ethnocentric. It doesn't work that way, all right? You carry these all the time, even if you at times are in a state of maybe world-centric consciousness. You can one tweet and you're right back down there, or all the way back down to egocentric, So let's not think too highly of ourselves, but what's my main point? I guess it's more of a question when it comes to what kind of world do you want to see? Do you want to call yourself and others to higher states of consciousness by your own words and language? Or not? Or do you want to keep everything at the low level? Because at the low level, you know what's more fun? Being victorious. I won, you know. I beat so-and-so, you know. So-and-so is an idiot and couldn't win, yet I won. You know what side is guilty of saying that? Every side that wins. You know what I'm saying? It creates a certain kind of world, is what I'm suggesting. And I was thinking about, like, if you just ask me, Ken Dobson, who's really a nothing, one of 8 billion people, what the biggest challenges we face as humanity faces right now. My guess is, my intuition, and also, I guess things I've read, it has something to do with the environment, like on the biggest level. And I mean like the biosphere and soil and water and ecosystems and sea change and farming and industrial poisons and energy. These are even bigger than the fact that we're fighting over borders and things like that. Like when the water stops, it will we'll see what the real conflicts are. So that's just an intuition I have, and maybe many of you share such a thing. Most of the language around that has tried to affect change on these global massive issues is also rooted in fear. Like, let's take The Inconvenient Truth. That was a scary freaking movie. And look where we are right now. I'm not saying there's no place for this. Like, we should just throw away all things that are. I'm just saying it doesn't appear to be working as a technique. What it does is create a massive divide between those who believe in climate change and those who don't believe, as if your personal beliefs, like it's a kind of silly, arbitrary wall that was built because that's the way the rhetoric forces it to go. Draw a line in the sand. You need to find out what side you're on. Oh, I'm on the good environmental side. I'm on the side that thinks that's a hoax. And what do you have after that? You have two sides that don't talk. It's like, where do we go from there? Well, we don't know. But I'm suggesting maybe fear and threat. I mean, you know this if you were at all a halfway decent parent. Does threats and shame really work that well? We're like, well, it kind of does. Maybe in the short term, but maybe not in the long term. And you know what we do with teachers who operate like that in the classroom? We fire them. So we know it doesn't work. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I'm asking kind of, what language are you using? What language are you using? And this is going to require so much. Like, you think it's difficult to put someone on the moon? Or Mars, for that matter? That seems like mathematically complicated. The kind of problem, like with the environment I'm talking about, is so much more difficult than flying someone up into outer space. And that's pretty hard. So that requires higher levels of consciousness and attention to combat. Or maybe there's a better word for it. I mean, I'm actually challenging you because I don't know the answer to this. If you were to leave today in the conversation or maybe in the talk back afterwards, start saying, well, what would be better ways of putting things? I would be curious to know. In our conflicts and problems and political challenges, and what are other ways of talking about it? I think that's a valid question. And I wanted to put these readings in here. Listen to what Tom Cohen says about mythopoetic language, which is, my personal favorite. It's my favorite kind of language. Mythopoetic language, specifically metaphor, has the ability to heal mental and emotional pain because the metaphor mediates the contradictions of life, chaos and peace, thus providing a solution that appeals to our deepest hope that it's possible to transcend the human condition. This is another way of saying we need more stories. And the main story is somebody's going to take away your fill in the blank, is a pretty boring story. We need more interesting stories, like the eagle and the wren. What is happening in that story? What is really happening in that story, the eagle and the wren? And why is that? Why does it have such power that a little wren gets inside the eagle and flies up and then flies out of the eagle, and it's the highest a wren has ever flown? Like, what is happening in that? That is a story. Guess what? That didn't happen, all right? That's a myth, as far as I know. So why are we telling that, and why do we need stories like that? Because they activate and mediate and heal and call us to a kind of hope. Rather than, where's my list of wars? War on the rich, war on poverty, war on pharmaceuticals, war on drugs, war on terrorism, war on guns, war on democracy, war on immigrants, war on American jobs, war on Christmas, war on Easter, war on Christ, war on the flag. How about a little tiny wren tucks away in the feathers of an eagle and flies higher than she ever imagined? You see how that opens up possibilities? Anyway, what else do I want to say? I might say that the act, maybe he says it in here, storytelling is a sacramental act. It's a sacramental act. It's sacred, in other words. Tell stories. And what kind of stories are you busy telling? And you might even ask yourself, what kind of stories are actually in the culture that contribute to healing, wholeness, goodness, possibility, or peace, which is our kind of sub-theme here. Who are the musicians? What are the movies? Who are the poets and storytellers and personalities, and who's doing this? Who's telling stories? Like John's story about Emma, who's going to get married the next day and is working at a Mexican restaurant. Did I get that right? That's a good freaking story. Oh, but let's talk about the war on drugs. And we need these I'm saying it's a sacramental act. And you have a role in it. It's not somebody else's job. Because every day, I've noticed, most of you use words. Every day. Every day, we co-create the world that we inhabit. Every day, by opening our mouth. Every day, we co-create the world. So, this is my challenge. I'm in a way, I'm preaching to myself. How am I using my own words here? Do I think about my language as a sacramental act, making sacred the world? And what responsibility do I have to tell my own stories of healing and peace and actually, when I was thinking about this week, one of the things we did in the pre-talk is I asked, "What stories do you know about peace?" And it took a few minutes, but they started trickling out. Just ordinary stories of peace and finding peace, and then cultural stories, and it started trickling out. This morning when I was thinking about it, I remembered the story of St. Francis. And so St. Francis went to North Africa and over to Egypt, and during the Crusades. And at one point, he crossed enemy lines and went and talked to the Sultan. He wanted to try to convince the Sultan that peace was a better option. And he probably also wanted to convert him, Guess what? Neither happened. The war continued, and he didn't convert to Christianity. But you know what mattered about the story? You know why we still tell that? It's because somebody crossed enemy lines and engaged in a real conversation. And he didn't get killed over it. So that kind of thing. I'm not saying you can be St. Francis, but I'm saying you can be St. Francis. That's what I'm saying. By the kinds of words you use and how you are in the world and who you want to engage with. What if he would have stayed over on his own side of the line, enemy line, and launched over pamphlets? You know, the Sultan's going to be like, oh my goodness, I didn't know this. Thank you for the pamphlet. It doesn't work, you know? Or loudspeakers. Dear Sultan, convert to Christianity, you know? That always works. It doesn't work, you know? Or put down your weapons. You go first, you know? It just doesn't work. But that took tremendous courage for St. Francis to cross enemy lines in his bare feet, in his little brown robe, and his tonsured head, you know. I'm sure his little disciples were like, oh no, we'll never see him again. So anyway, that's what popped in my mind today as a story worth telling. And here St. Francis entered the conflict and crossed enemy lines, which is kind of amazing. And I have a couple quotes from Gandhi, I suppose, because it's hard to talk about peace without thinking about Gandhi, who was not passive by any stretch of the imagination. You know, just like, hey, let's just get along with the British, you know. I don't think so. It was a kind of warrior energy, but channeled differently, we might say, about Gandhi. So, two quotes here. Peace will not come out of a clash of arms. We still don't believe that. We think peace will come when we win, basically. He says peace will not come out of a clash of arms, but out of justice lived and done by unarmed nations in the face of all odds. You know, words create worlds. He's creating that even as a possibility just by saying it. And I like this one, since I mentioned Islam with St. Francis and the Sultan. The very word Islam means peace, which is true. This is from Gandhi, though. The very word Islam means peace. And Leslie, you brought that up this morning, and so thanks. The very word Islam means peace, which is nonviolence. Then he adds, without prayer, there is no inward peace. And I think he's sort of getting at this conversation between inward and outward. Inner peace and outer peace, and they're in a kind of dance, you know? And when you have no inner peace and you're demanding it outward, it doesn't seem to work. Or if you're only seeking inner peace and have blocked off the world, it doesn't seem to work either. So they're in a kind of dance, this inner and outer kind of thing. So I feel like I should wind it down here. And I wanted to end with this poem, because, you know, I might be a kind of an idealistic, romantic type person, but I think poetry can save the world in that it creates worlds of possibilities. And everything pumping through your social media platforms and on the news, everything, all of it, is not very poetic. And it's creating a world where the tensions only increase because that makes big companies more money. And we know this, and yet we still participate in it. So, like I said actually a couple months ago, watch the news and follow it with a poem. I'm not saying don't watch the news. I'm just saying follow it with some other freaking story. That's all I'm saying. So I'm going to end with a poem. My wish for you is a homecoming in this life. My wish for you is a homecoming in this life. A homecoming, a real homecoming, like on the deepest level. My wish for you is a homecoming in this life, a coming in out of the cold, a drying off the icy rain's touch. This was written by a poet who knows general rain. A drying off the icy rain's touch in the holy reliquary of the childhood memory. May you find there the unshakable truth of your preciousness. May you find there the unshakable truth of your own preciousness, and I might add, and in so discover the possibility of some other's preciousness on the other side of the enemy's lines, I might add. May you remember the cool and padded, what is that? Grace. Thank you. May you remember the cool and padded grace of your wet feet against the stone. I mean, talk about the ordinary. Your wet feet against the stone. Or your bare feet in the sand. Can you feel that right now? What is that? What is that feeling? Your bare feet in the sand, of your wet feet against the stone. In the middle of the long night, a single burning light serving as your peace. May you fold back the pocket, holding your slights, your jilted times, your feelings of betrayal, and discover small diamonds there, created from the crushed coal of your hates and rage. May you taste resurrection. Thanks for listening.